All right, just wrapping up well, let's see, who do we got? Two-thirds of us are not on the video, but so Mike, do you want to start off with the image, maybe go
Yeah,
backwards, and then
yeah,
we'll hit the
do this.
forms? Okay.
Hey, so we this is a recent transaction issue with Peter Felis that he shared with us. So thank you.
Oh.
Oh, was I not supposed to reveal the person?
No, you weren't.
It's not Peter Felis, y'all.
And Peter's on the call just for the record.
I know, we're focusing on him right now, but I misspoke.
It's all right. I just sent Peter a text that said, "Hey, it's usually best to not connect the agent to the situation."
Yeah, I was totally under the impression we were gonna like call on Peter and he was
Oh,
gonna like.
no, it's all right.
Sorry, Peter.
But hey, let me walk you through it, and we try to be a learning environment. Obviously, we've got a lot of transactions that come at us, and I like this one, primarily because there was an image that went with it, and so what we're looking at for those who do have their video on, we're looking at a cul-de-sac from an aerial view in color. We got a property to the left in kind of a pie shape. You can imagine a pie shape lot. The homes were built, I want to say roughly, say 15-ish years ago. This particular owner is a seller client of ours, and we are currently under contract. And you're looking at one of the owners who first moved into the development, and what you see in yellow is an outline of where we believe the actual property line is. When you blow it up, you'll see where there's a fence in the backyard. I think for those who are driving, I'll try to describe this. A lot of homes will put a fence, not fence their front yard, so you kind of have a fence that begins at about halfway, where the home is. And that's what this homeowner did, and put a fence to fit fence in the backyard. And what a lot of our homeowners do is they go out to the street, and if you walked out to the curb there, you probably would see a brass, like end of a nail, big brass, tack where an assessor, not an assessor, a surveyor will put a marker as to where a property line is. Nod your head if you've ever seen these. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So he walked out there and he kind of eyeballed where the back of the property line was, which he could see, and where the front of the property line was, where this tack was. And that's why the fence ends up where it is. It's kind of like this straight line. Well, if you're looking at what we're seeing on the screen, you can see it actually doesn't do that at all. It jogs way over. There's a lot more side yard to our listing, and our seller has a lot more side yard than where he put this fence. Mike, if you move the image a little bit, I'll tell you where this actually became. First, we were aware, and bonus points if anyone can tell me in the seller's disclosures where it talks about encroachments. Bonus points if you have that memorized. I'll leave that one hanging for a minute. But it first came to our attention. Our listing agent said, the seller said, "Hey, my fire pit at the back of the property might encroach a little bit on my neighbor's property." So they had a long, I'm simplifying this down to just pertinent information, but the surveyor came out, looked at this, and said, "I think this is where the property line is, and it has nothing to do with the fire pit in the back. It has the fence is way off." So, of course, what the neighbor has done is they built their grass and sprinkler system and everything of their landscaping up to the fence, and has grassed all this area and has been taking care of it for what did we decide? 7 years, 8 years? I can't remember.
12.
12 years. Oh, there it is. Okay,
Ooh.
so for 12 years he's been taking care of this property, and it didn't come to anyone's attention that this fence was in the wrong place until it was up for sale and now under contract. So have I set the stage pretty good? We thought we had a fire pit encroachment. What we really got is a fence that's nowhere near the property line. It's probably off, by looking at this image, in the biggest portion, it may be off 8 to 10 feet.
Yeah.
That's
Correct.
right. Yeah, it's 8 to 10 feet too close to our seller's property, and that meaning, frankly, that the owner, uh, the budding neighbor here in the cul-de-sac, is encroaching technically onto the subject property that is for sale. Everyone see that? You can move that around a little bit. Maybe you can do image to fit if you're trying to. Yep. Yeah. So, hey, Mike, your cursor right there. See that little line? That line where, yeah, that's the yellow. Yeah, that is about 10 feet. And what that black shade there is really, and that line is the fence. And the very, very back where you see the blurred circle all the way to the back, yep, that's the fire pit. So we thought the fire pit encroached. It looks like it may not. It's pretty close, judging by this yellow line, which is just frankly a guess by the surveyor at this point. But you can see how far off this fence is from where actually the property line is. What do you think our problems are going to be with this? Now we're under contract. Let's just say we're in due diligence, and we've just discovered this. So what are some of the steps we have to take? And in the seller's disclosure, does anyone know what section that is that talks about encroachments? Bonus points? No? Nikki's smiling like, I think I know. Maybe it's somewhere in there. Yeah. Well, let's see. Okay, I'll read it to you. It says, to ask the seller, do you know of any, if any, on your property, such as fence, deck, or other improvements encroaches, meaning to extends onto any adjoining property? If yes, please describe to your knowledge the nature of the approximate location and such encroachment. So where we start off with is we have fire pit, right? Back section of the property. That's how we start off in section 16 is the answer. 16 in seller's disclosure. And what we actually find out is it's bigger than that. So what do you think our next steps would be? Since Peter has all the answers, Peter, maybe you could just hold your tongue for just a minute and let's see what everybody comes up with. What are we going to do with this situation?
Will, let me chime in on one thing. I mean, I'm assuming that obviously that fence is drawn in such a way that they looked at a back property corner and a pin on the front curb and assumed the line was straight.
That's correct.
Strung a line, put a fence on it, which is why we see the neighbor to the south or the bottom of the screen encroached up to what they believed was a straight line. As a matter of fact, the lot was never straight. It actually had that jog, and so it makes sense that they would have assumed that their fire pit was maybe just over if you look at that. But when they come to find out, it's not over at all. It's the neighbor next door that's completely over the opposite direction.
That's right. Yep, that's correct. That's what we've got. And I can see how they get there. So, just a little tip for all of us to don't draw straight lines in your mind or with a tape from a pin to the back of the property and think that's the line. Sometimes it's not. But
especially in a cul-de-sac. I think that sometimes down a straight road, it makes sense right and left. But if it's on a bend, on a knuckle, in a cul-de-sac, there could be adjustments.
Yep. Sometimes this has to do with setbacks. These property lines get jogged a little bit because the corner of the property has to be so many feet from the property line. And so in order to fit the architecture of the plan, the property line had to jog. And that's, to Lance's point, these cul-de-sacs are trying to fit the plans in. So like that would make sense because that means that if you continue that fence and that property line, that corner of that property could be 4 feet from the property line, which would likely not be allowed by setback requirements.
Yeah.
Can I throw another curveball on this?
Yeah.
I mean, I think Ron, I didn't see Ron's complete comment in the chat, but I think he said, hey, it looks like it could be a little too close on the property line as well. Now with that jog. What's interesting though, is that when the building permit would have been issued on that lower house, the county would have had the actual correct building dimensions. So technically that home shouldn't be within a setback problem. Say there's a 10-foot setback from that corner. We see a patio and a walkway up, or not just a walkway up to the front door. that can be in the setback, but that home structure most likely is correct based on how it was submitted to the county or the local municipality for their building permit. I'd be shocked if it wasn't, but I mean, you did say the engineer went out, or the surveyor went out, and he said, I think it's here. I'm assuming he knows exactly where it's at.
The what you're looking at right now is the overlay of the research on it from the surveyor, but he had not yet completed the actual survey when this image was taken.
And since then, he's completed the survey, and it does look like this.
Yes.
Got it.
To answer Tara's question real quick, is this the county parcel map or from the county surveyor's office? I'm going to say this is the Salt Lake County GIS system, just the web version, the web map. Tracy asks, is there a plat map? And what does it say?
Well,
There's a plat. Yes.
And the plat should have this jog to it. The homeowner did not look at the plat. They looked at the pin and the back of the property line and put a fence up. So, and everyone's happy for 12 years. Everyone's happy until we go under contract. So, it was not a problem, right? This is why you're worth it. Because you never know what you're going to get into with each real estate transaction. So anybody want to weigh in on what you would do next as a listing agent? How are you going to approach this one? So now we have, what do we, we're in due diligence. So what do you want to do with this? What's next steps for you?
What does the seller want to do?
Seller is willing to make it right. So I guess we can start there. Let's have a conversation with our own client and our seller. Seller, this is what we discovered. How are we going to repair this? That means we may have.
Is the buyer okay? Pete, is your buyer okay with the current fence location, or does he wanting it to be moved?
Pete went on mute.
I might be able to answer.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh no, I represent the seller. No, the buyer's not okay with that. So, or I shouldn't say they're not okay with it. They are no longer okay with it because they've since canceled the contract.
Oh.
So,
did they really?
Yeah, they canceled on us.
Okay,
so.
I didn't have that piece of information. I didn't want to, hurt you when you were down, Peter.
Yeah, so
I didn't want to.
They're gone now. So
throw some lemon juice in a cut. That's not what we were doing these huddles for.
So, yeah,
I'm not joining again.
Yeah. Well, sorry about that. I mean,
okay.
We did talk through the remedy on this is to move the fence where it's supposed to be. That could cause a problem with the neighbor, though, who now has got sprinkler and grass and everything else. Or we could put some dollar amounts to it. We could certainly have a credit towards it. We can have a written agreement between the neighbors that everyone understands that the property line the fence is not on the property line. I agree to move the fence in the spring or in the summer. Here's a credit to the buyer. The disclosure obviously is a necessity. We've got to say, hey, this is what we found out. It does remind me that anytime someone says, should I get a survey? You always, you can't say no. You can't say things like, well, no, there's people don't get surveys. To minimize any kind of evaluation or inspection would increase our liability dramatically. So I think that's kind of the high points. Anybody else want to add in or weigh in on this one? Are you just grateful that you don't have a property line dispute in a current pending transaction?
I will add that this is a great reminder of why it's important to at least look at the county map of the lot that you're selling when you are considering taking the listing. That's not directed at Pete. It's just what happens is what Pete already said. If a buyer learns that there's an encroachment issue, and now because of their request to have the fence and sprinklers moved, they most likely feel like they're going to create a lot of friction with that neighbor. And the last thing they want is a neighbor next door that does not like them because they've made them move a fence and those items, right? And so it doesn't surprise me that the buyer said, yeah, we're walking. Now they might have walked for other reasons, but certainly this weighs into that decision. So if we can, and we often don't, but if we can at least just peek at the map and see if the fences and the boundaries look close to what would normally be appropriate, that is a good start as well, though. Just a good reminder.
Yep.
2 comments. If the contract is canceled, what does the seller do going forward? And Tara asks, a chainsaw could fix the fence. I mean, I can't argue that is true. I could only argue
What
it's
fence? I don't see a fence anymore. What are we talking about? Yeah. No, we're not going to be chainsawing the fence. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think practically right now in the winter, if this thing gets a new buyer, we're obviously going to disclose what we found right from the start. This is the line. This is where the fence is. We have an agreement. Now we need to work on an agreement with the neighbor, and I'd get that in writing that we can address and solve this issue in, when the weather is appropriate. And then the cost should be borne by the seller who placed the fence in the wrong place. I mean, that's, they put the fence up first. If I remember the timeline of this, they were the first ones to move in.
Yes.
That's right. Yeah. So they didn't have a neighbor. So anyway,
You could just do a boundary line adjustment.
Yep.
Draper City won't let them.
Both property owners could just decide to leave the fence where it's at now that it's not under contract, and have the surveyor do legal descriptions to modify the boundary line and just record a boundary line adjustment.
Peter, did you say that someone wouldn't let them do a boundary line?
Draper City will not allow that because of the space, because of the ground. So it's more than just a little bit. So Draper City,
their minimum lot size is a problem, or that the encroachment next, like Ron said, the fence too close to the house is a problem.
So they have minimum lot size, and Draper Cities, they can only acquire up to 200 feet.
200 square feet. Got it. Sounds like removing the fence.
It's in the works.
So chainsaw, Peter?
No, they're just going to have the company come reinstall a whole new fence and tear out the old one. So
There you go. Okay, I'm kidding. I feel bad. I asked Peter, you guys, last week if I could use his example, figuring that he'd be able to tell us that he's under contract, and then I'm like, hey, I'm going to use your example. I had no idea that the transaction failed. I feel bad.
That is what it is.
You're going to need a 20-second hug, I guess, from someone today. So apologize.
No biggie, no biggie. It happens.
For those who are new on Huddle, this is not what we do. We don't take failed transactions and put our agents on and then talk about how their transaction failed. That's not the motive of Huddle. Anyway, thanks, Peter, for being a good sport. All right, Mike, take us to the next. We got some forms we wanted to highlight too today.
Well, yeah, there is one subject that came up that's come up a couple times in my office that I wanted to just bring to everyone's attention. And I don't know why it's a thing. Maybe it's a fluke that's just happening up here. But we have had 2 buyer's agents encounter this problem, and it's with listing agent status updates. And I'm sure that most of you, when you're putting something under contract, are paying close attention to those status updates on the MLS. But as buyer's agents, we've had 2 listing agents seemingly use that status update as leverage to attract potential backup offers, or use it in some type of goofy leverage in some way or another. Just FYI, be vigilant about those things, and we don't need to report them on the MLS immediately, but we should be having that phone call and asking the question immediately. And so please do that. Please be aware of that. Monitor that situation. What Scott says, what is the exact rule? I looked it up, and I believe my memory says 3 business days. So if you put it under contract on a Thursday, you might not get a status update. Well, they could technically update it on Monday and be within compliance. So Tara is confirming that yes, that is the rule. Even though I only looked it up 3 days ago, It's still iffy whether or not I remember it correctly. So yeah, be aware of that. They actually, we didn't even realize it until it was a quick closing, and we didn't realize it till almost 7 business days later because we were just like, cramming everything into a very short timeline to get a deal done. So everything worked out okay, but we at the end of the transaction, they were in fact trying to leverage that some way. We think so. Be aware of those things. All right, let's jump into some forms. Some of Will's favorite things on earth. Forms, rush, the usual stuff. All right, and as usual, these are just reviews. So if you do have something to contribute, please speak up. But we want to make sure everybody is squared away with and how and when to use these things. So this is a contingent cancellation. And depending on market conditions, depending on your scenario, sometimes these are appropriate and sometimes they're not. That's where skilled real estate agents come in. But just remember, you do have this form available to you. So this is the contingent cancellation addendum. So let's jump to paragraph 1, extension of deadlines. Seller and buyer hereby agree to the following. Either you're checking A or B or both, I guess. Due diligence deadline is extended to, and then finance and appraisal deadline is extended to. So you could actually use both of those checkboxes if you wish. Then we're going to jump out here to the meat of it, which is paragraph 2, notice of cancellation. If for any reason seller does not accept the terms of this addendum in its entirety by the applicable deadline provided below, this addendum shall act as a buyer's written notice of cancellation of the REPSI pursuant to, and then you're going to pick which condition you're canceling on. So you're either canceling on the due diligence condition or the financing condition. Please only pick one there. And then 3, deadline to accept this addendum. Seller shall have until A, the last mutually accepted due diligence deadline prior to this addendum, or B, the last mutually accepted finance and appraisal deadline prior to this addendum. So I think everybody sort of knows the bottom line is you're leveraging, you're trying to get some extensions here for your finance and appraisal or your due diligence deadline. And you need a document to say, hey, listen, you're either extending this or this exact document is serving as cancellation. Because there are times when you become tied up. Let's say you just submit an addendum to extend a finance and appraisal deadline, and that deadline is coming up in 6 hours, let's say. You're faced with the problem of submitting this as well as putting a cancellation in writing and having it ready to go. So sometimes you don't have to do that. You can just submit this document and you are serving notice that they do not accept it. Then this is the official notice to cancel.
Yeah, normally I get this call about, hey, my deadline is today at 5 and I can't get a hold of the listing agent. Or I've gotten a hold of the listing agent and they can't get a hold of the seller. They're agreeing to extend, but I don't have the extension yet. And then what happens if I don't get the extension? And so now these discussions with our buyer is, do you want to protect the earnest money at the cost of canceling? So how much does the earnest money mean to you relative to being under contract to purchase and the right to purchase? And somehow in this, it's this, what means more to you? The extension of the deadline only if I protect my earnest money and my right to cancel? Or is there something we don't yet know? So sometimes it's, do you like the house more than the earnest money more than the property? Like that's in there, but that's way oversimplifying. There's only some cases where that's the material issue. And then you find out they don't really like the house that much. But most of the time there's something unknown and they still want to have that protection with the earnest money and extend, but they can't get the extension can't get a hold of the agent or can't get a hold of seller or combination of the both. What do you do? That's why this form was built. It's either you extend or I cancel. It's that kind of negotiation. I'm only going to extend if I continue to have the right to cancel in the future, or I just cancel right now. So that's what it brings us to the point of how important earnest money is in transactions. And sellers, of course, want compensation for being off the market. Um, this is obviously an opportunity. If I put my listing agent hat on this one, let's not be fooled. Just because I do an extension, they can still cancel and receive their earnest money back. That's exactly what this form is all about. I'm not getting anything from my seller. So, but they are giving me an ultimatum, right? Extend my right to cancel in the future, or I cancel now. I know that's said a little bit differently. That's exactly what this form is, though. It's still a right to cancel in the future.
Yeah, and I think too, you may be in a tense negotiation. Maybe you do need extra time, and they're telling you no. This might be your last ditch effort to maybe get a few more days.
Yep.
Put it in writing. You've been talking back and forth, and they're saying no, probably not. This is a really good last ditch effort to potentially get that extra time, so they know you're serious. So it has its uses, and so be aware of it. Scott asks, this is an interesting question, Will. So deadline is 4:59 or 5 o'clock?
Well, once it's 5, it's technically gone because it's 5 and 1 second. So anything past 1 or 1 second past 5 is the deadline is passed.
I'll tell you what, you know how stressful that would be if you're looking
If
at
you're
the
down to
seconds of your
it's happened.
delivery.
I've had some agents getting that thing signed at 4:50, 4:58. And we're all sweating bullets.
Well, Susan says, what happens if the seller check and signs rejection? Really good question. Essentially, the seller is saying, I'm not going to do anything. And then when they do, they've said I'm rejecting. So they're rejecting and signing. This is still notice of cancellation. Right. So the seller the only thing the seller can do is accept, reject, or ignore. And the only way this is not a cancellation is if they accept it and sign.
Correct.
In all other instances, it's a notice of cancellation.
That's right. That is correct. Yep. Yeah, it says if for any reason the seller does not accept the terms of this addendum in its entirety by the deadline provided, this addendum shall act as buyer's written notice of cancellation. Yep. So I think you're right, Mike. I like how you're saying it's my last ditch effort. It's my last effort to save this thing because I'm going to cancel anyway. I'll keep it alive if I can get an extension, but I'm okay with the cancellation. Yeah. Do you want to move to, so the other form that gets triggered with this one is the reinstatement of the REPC.
Yes.
Because see, when we're having a hard time getting a hold of people, we make assumptions that they are aware and they're playing some kind of game with us where they're not going to extend. But there could be cases where the communication's just not there. They're really not aware. We can't reach them. They're out of town. They're on a cruise ship. Their work, maybe they're in the medical profession, something like that. Yeah.
Here we go. Reinstatement of REPC. All right. Yeah, good call. So for those who have not used this, this form does obviously have certain uses where it's really helpful and sometimes where it's probably not appropriate. But let's read it first. So the title of this form is the Reinstatement of REPC Addendum. Paragraph 1, acknowledgement of prior cancellation. Buyer and seller acknowledge that the REPC was previously canceled by buyer in accordance with, and then you're going to check which condition they canceled on. Okay. Paragraph 2, reinstatement of REPC. Notwithstanding the prior cancellation referenced above, buyer and seller wish to proceed forward with this transaction and reinstate the REPC. Accordingly, upon the mutual acceptance of this addendum, buyer and seller agree that their respective rights and obligations under the REPC, including all prior addenda and counteroffers, are reinstated in their entirety are in full force and effect. Buyer and seller further agree that the contract deadlines referenced in section 24 of the REPC and as modified by any prior addenda and counteroffers are modified as follows. And then you have the opportunity to check a few boxes and update some deadlines. But there is also that very bottom box for those who are driving. There is a box to check that says Rep C deadlines remain unchanged. And then you do have the opportunity to put in some additional terms for this document. So the question always comes, how much time can pass before before this document becomes probably not appropriate, or this addendum becomes inappropriate to submit? What say you, Will?
If someone had called me up and said the transaction failed yesterday, I would say use this. If it canceled 3 days ago, I would say use reinstatement. If it was within a week, I'd probably say reinstatement. But if it was 30 days or more, I think we may consider writing a new offer. But from a legal standpoint, reinstating a Rep C that was 5 years old is still a contract that's valid as long as everyone signs it. So, I mean, I just readjust my deadlines. Let's say a contract expired 5 years ago. I just have my deadlines in the future. Then I do technically have a binding contract. So I don't know that there's certainly not a rule that says only use this if. I think what makes sense so that there's no ambiguity in the contract is the question and the lens to look through. If there is ambiguity, write a new contract. If there isn't, and this simply can just reinstate or resurrect an old contract that we can close on and everyone's clear about that, these are the only modifications, is a deadline or two, then you could use the reinstatement.
Yeah, good answer. I think too, if you've got a contract that was canceled more than a week ago and you've got 8 addendums, it might be better for all the parties just to have a fresh new contract.
Yeah.
So take all the information into account before you reinstate, because simplicity is always better, and everybody understanding what's going on is always better. And so you could have situations where this creates some problems, but you can also readjust dates and make everything easy. So
you just spawned a thought. If an agent calls me and said I had one that was really complicated, and I'd say, all right, let's not reinstate it then, but I would like paragraph 1. Buyer and seller acknowledge that the Rep C was previously canceled. I think we have to acknowledge that no one's making an argument about language that was pre-agreed to, that contract is expired and canceled, and no one's making any claim to those terms. So that's where my head would go. I'd say, well, are we clear that no one's going to make an argument about terms of a previously canceled Rep C? Just a thought.
Yeah. Sherry asks, humor moment, a couple has a nasty divorce 5 years prior, but now they create their own reinstatement marriage contract. How will that fly? Ooh. Reinstate the marriage? I don't know. I don't think that's a thing. I think you gotta go all the way. You gotta go before a judge.
I think anyone's been in a long-term relationship, I think we've all been through these phases where I'm reinstating. I'm in the doghouse. I'm on the couch. Now I'm back in the bedroom. All right. Been reinstated. Okay.
Because we were going to talk about this. We use this document all the time, but I wanted to review it because we haven't reviewed it, which is the buyer's notice of cancellation. We use this document all the time, but I do want to point out a few things. If let's just start with the simplest. If you're having conflict about a cancellation, obviously call your broker and ask which box to check. But if never play fast and loose with paragraph 3, checking other, and then writing something in. If you have some question about the buyer's notice of cancellation, please talk to your broker. But you'll notice, let's just go to paragraph 3 real quick.
Hey, Mike, I'm so glad we're going through this one, because this is where we get contention over earnest money. That's the deal. The seller says, that's my earnest money. And the buyer says, no, that's my earnest money. This form is only restating what the contract has already said and what the parties agreed to already. It's not setting new terms. So that's why Mike just said you can't be fast and loose with number 3, because if buyer says, well, I'm canceling for this reason, if that reason isn't already agreed to in the addendums or the body of the contract we've already agreed to, then it's not binding. The only thing we have here is to restate what is already stated in the Rev C that was agreed to by the parties. That outlines the ability for someone to cancel. And then by a domino effect, what happens when I cancel? Do I get the earnest money? Does the seller get the earnest money? Or does the seller have the right to sue me for performance? So remember, the Rep C already outlined all of those terms and factors. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I'll follow up with my own kind of anecdotal story to this. I was loosely involved in a situation where the one party decided to, there was some conflict in the transaction, and there was some question about whether or not they could cancel and get their earnest money back. And so the solution was to check the wrong box, submit the cancellation, and then a week later, when they realized their mistake, they checked a different box and submitted a new cancellation because someone had disputed, oh no, well, that's not a real thing. You can't just check a box and expect your earnest money back. So their solution was, oh, well, there's a new box I could check that potentially could support my argument to get my earnest money back.
Right.
So,
I remember this one, Mike.
Yeah. And, you only get one time. You only get one time. So make sure it's right. And if there is some confusion.
So what happened is they canceled based on due diligence, but due diligence had passed. Mm-hmm. So they mark box number 1, and then they sign it and send it over. And the seller says, okay, no problem, because you're past your deadline. I'll take the earnest money. Thank you very much. And then the other agent says, oh, whoa, wait a minute. I marked the wrong box. I meant to mark financing and appraisal, which is still in the future, in which the buyer gets the earnest money, not the seller. And the seller and the listing agent make the argument, you've already canceled. You can't cancel again. It's like you can't, what does it say?
Triple stamp a double stamp, Will.
Yeah, you can't die twice. You can't get pregnant twice. I mean, you can't get re-pregnant. I don't know. You can't get re-dead. I'm sorry. You got to keep, Nikki, this is what we do. We try to laugh while we learn. But you are already canceled the contract. So that did put us in a tough spot, because I think that was a pretty good argument. They had already canceled the contract based on due diligence, and it was 3 days earlier. Now, 3 days later, they want to say, whoops, I want to cancel on financing and appraisal. It sounds like it's my dispute.
Yeah.
And the agent, the agent was the sister of the buyer. Yeah, so that'll make family dinners a little more awkward. Because they already are. No, I'm just kidding. All family dinners are wonderful and beautiful all the time.
You guys have family dinners?
Hey, some of my kids only eat well on Sunday, Mike.
I believe that. All right. Does anybody have any other feedback or comments on this or anything on the buyer's notice of cancellation or anything else?
I've never seen a risk of loss one. Thank goodness. That's a tough one. But with all the fires in California, every single one of those transactions that were pending were risk of loss or force majeure. It's uncontrollable events outside the control, of the parties. And they did legally those cancel binding contracts because you can no longer perform. And we have that language in our contract, which is under risk of loss. If there is something like a flood, or landslide or something to that effect. That, and does anyone remember the percentage of loss versus the sales price? Put that in the chat if you remember. I'd love to
Oh
see
yeah,
who
we
are.
will offer 1,500 bonus points for correct answers in the chat.
Yeah.
1,500 bonus points.
What percentage of value is it?
Peter, Nicole, and Joe are all saying 10%.
That is correct. Nice job.
Ooh, 1,500 bonus points, all three of you. Congratulations. Two comments also. Scott says, get confirmation of earnest money. It's amazing how often this is not delivered on time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm up to my, principal broker ears on that one. Anytime we have a earnest money that is not deposited in the 4 calendar days, as stated in the rep C, we have a duty to inform the clients, both parties, and then we have a duty to clean that up. And it's pretty easy to do if you do it in the beginning. If you wait till later, you're going to get issues enforceability. See, if we were on the buyer side and that was deposited on the fifth day, and then we want to hold the seller to terms of the agreement, they can just simply, in their discovery, uh, find out that the earnest money missed the deadline and the buyer was in default from day one, and now we can't hold the seller to a term. It's a very bad place to be.
Yeah. And by the way, Will, this is, I know you've already stated it, but let's state it slightly different. Is it the buyer's agent responsibility to inform all the parties when they discover the earnest money is not submitted on time from their own client?
Yeah, because that's a material fact that has to be told to both parties. You can't say, well, I'm only worried about my own client. It's not to my client's best interest to divulge this to the seller. It would weaken their bargaining position. The fact is they breached the contract already. Look, this all comes out in discovery. When everyone looks at the contract, the first deadline in the contract, well, it's acceptance, and then the next one is the earnest money deposit. And that 4 calendar days, if that's a breach by our buyer, they're going to have a very hard time of enforcing that contract on the seller.
Rachel says in the comments, I have had two risk of loss, one fire, another new FEMA map made land unbuildable.
Huh.
Okay, there you have it. There you have it.
Wow. So it does happen. I mean, I think we have to have that language in our contracts. We did talk about during COVID the concept of force majeure when you could not inspect a property because someone in the property was, infected, which, yeah, I guess we have a different view of some of that stuff now. But at the time, that was very, very material. So you couldn't perform your inspections. You couldn't do any of that. And that's why we had the COVID addendum. If you guys remember, it was on the backs of all of that. But yeah, risk of loss. I don't see very many of those. It's usually pretty tragic when there is one. And 10% is the right answer. So I have seen those patched back together after insurance claim. So you kick the can down the road, you extend deadlines, particularly due diligence. So buyer is satisfied with the condition of the property. Some of those can be patched up. And literally the home is being patched back together. So, but most of those do end up in a cancellation and everyone moves forward. Let me ask you guys this. What happens if your buyer or seller client passes away while they're under contract? What happens to that contract? Let's say your seller passes away while they're under contract.
Sherry says it is void.
Everyone agree? Rachel says no.
We got three voids and a no. Peter says trustee if in a trust.
Yeah, it's the purpose of the trust. So it addresses issues like that. But if we're just a tenant in common or joint tenants and the surviving spouse passes away while we're under contract, that contract does become void when the principal passes away. which it's very rare, but every once in a while, this has happened a few times. It just the nature of the numbers in life, and that can be tough when that happens. So, but yeah, they are a void. And a buyer pass away. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Read it.
Kristen says, I had a buyer pass away while under contract. We continued and closed with just his wife. Both were on an offer initially.
Well, I mean, if the lender is okay, I mean, certainly she can purchase. And you can say that she was a party to that contract. So her spouse passes away. It was cash deal. Yeah. So yeah, less complicated. So no lender involved, no qualifications of two incomes. So it's cash. She was a party to that. You could make an argument from the other side. She has a duty to perform, even though her spouse passed away. So didn't mean to take such a dark approach to this. Sorry about that, but we got into enforceability, and it triggered a thought there. So okay, Mike, let's go to the next one. We got time for what? One more?
Yeah, we got time for one more.
Okay.
And all right, this always sparks kind of an interesting conversation. The buyer's notice of withdrawal of offer or counter offer. Yes, there's a form for that. Now, just to ask, I'll ask the audience. This one's pretty easy though, so there's only 500 bonus points available for this particular question. But at what point can you withdraw an offer or a counter offer? At what point? Let's say you submitted it. It's Monday morning at 9 o'clock. That's the only information you have. All right, we've got Rachel, Joe, and Peter all earned 500 bonus points before it is accepted, prior to acceptance. That's right. We can always withdraw an offer or counter offer prior to acceptance. And this is the form we use to do it. And real quick, so paragraph 1, offer or counter offer. A, buyer submitted a purchase offer for the property as contained in the above reference REPSI, or B, buyer submitted a counter offer to seller as contained in addendum whatever on this particular day. So this document serves as formal written notice that buyer withdraws the applicable offer or counter offer as checked above. So this does spawn a few questions. So of course, we're supposed to use this form. Of course, we're supposed to deliver notices signed by our clients in writing. But what if you submitted it and you're very fearful that they could sign and accept this thing like now? Will, is there anything else that's acceptable to do in this situation?
Oh my gosh. You're funny. Yeah, get this signed immediately and then communicate to the other side that you're withdrawing the offer. I like provable communication, so I do think that an email and a text is good. Email sometimes get lost. Text is really good. That does count. It's not a notice though. It's just communication. So the notice has to be in writing, even though we're not bound by the REPSI yet because we haven't signed the REPSI. The REPSI is not binding yet. So we withdraw the offer. This is just a written withdrawal of the offer. And it is prior to anything being accepted. I'm not sure we're going to go down. Do we have there's kind of a rabbit hole here. And Scott Raven had posed a question to the group a while ago. So can a buyer make multiple offers on multiple properties at the same time? That's kind of where we started off with. Thank you, Rachel, for being a part of our meeting. Always add a lot to our content. Appreciate you. So that's kind of where so this form, canceling a deal. So what do you think about the idea that an agent is and a buyer is making, say, 3 or 4 offers on 3 different properties? And let me add a little bit more fact to it. They can't purchase 3 or 4. They can purchase 1. So, but they've been burned a lot. So they make a lot of offers on a lot of properties that fit their criteria. And they've lost out on properties. So now they're just casting a wider net. and they're writing offers on multiple properties. All right. You want to read that, Mike?
Yeah, a couple comments coming in. Yes, they can make multiple offers, but they can only go under contract for one property. Joe Holden says it is BS exclamation, but it happens.
Yeah, so where we get in here, and by the way, Kevin Larson's not on this call, but he did a fantastic job, I thought, Scott, of really outlining your answer and addressing the points that were of concern. But number one, we get the idea that when we enter contracts, we do so in good faith. And material information, whether buyer or seller, is disclosed to the other party. And material is the things that people should know. Like if I did enter these contracts with this disclaimer that said I'm only capable of purchasing one property at a time, although I've made offers on multiple properties and the seller is aware of that, it does defeat the argument of lack of good faith. But that's not what happens. That's why Joe says it's kind of BS because, so, hey, listing agents, maybe we should start asking, made any other offers, any other properties? Are you under contract on any other properties? As of now, are you able to purchase? It's more vetting your buyer that you're getting in bed with. That's where the arguments are. There's been some lines in the sand that would suggest that once you go under contract, you cancel one prior to due diligence. I could see where a buyer wants to analyze the facts of a property before they cancel, and they would need the evaluation to be done. But it does call into question their ability to perform under the contract, and they didn't disclose it. So I'm not comfortable with that. So if any of you called me and said, I've got a buyer, I want to make 3 offers, we don't want to cancel till we find out all the information about it, I would suggest that you disclose this fact to the seller. And if you can go under contract with them being aware of the fact that you're shopping up until due diligence, well, fine. That is the purpose of due diligence. So, but we just need the disclosure of our ability to perform and that we don't violate the principle of good faith when you contract.
Yeah, I would say that there's a technical way to do it. There's an ethical way to do it, but that's not the prevailing way that people do it. And I think that's our problem with it.
Yeah.
The problem is that people are manipulating the situation to when they do multiple offers at one time.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah,
Please do.
I also think it's the responsibility of the listing agent to ask some pertinent questions. So if you're wanting to know, hey, are these buyers? One thing that I've started doing because is asking, did they see the house in person?
Yeah.
Like, have they actually been through the home?
Yep.
We had a situation, it wasn't my deal, but we had a situation where a buyer wrote the offer, it was accepted, not knowing that they had not actually gone through the home, and then came for inspections through the home for the first time and decided, oh, I actually don't want this home, and canceled. And the listing agent had no idea that they had not physically been in the home. So while yes, the buyer's agent could have shared that, it's also our responsibility as listing agent to ask pertinent questions. Hey, are they writing multiple offers?
Yeah.
They've written offers, like, do they have any other outstanding offers, or are they only submitting on this one?
Right. Yeah, you're spot on. You're spot on.
Yeah, and I think too, go back 3 or 4 years ago when the market was insane. You really couldn't blame people for writing multiple offers at once because they were competing against 10 or 15 other offers and their chances of success were very low. And so the prevailing wisdom was, well, you better write a whole bunch and hope and pray that you get one. Whether or not that's a good idea is another discussion. But yeah, like there are instances where you can understand why people would do it, and a whole lot of other instances where they probably shouldn't. All right, Will.
Okay.
58.
We're about to sign off. Hey, one more final thought. I just spent a few days last week attending the St. George Parade of Homes. And if you've never done that, put it on your bucket list. Make sure you do that at some point. Maybe next year. It closes in 3 days. There's still time if you want to go down and see some amazing houses. 40,000 visitors from out of town attend the St. George Parade of Homes. They get 25 locals. That means 65,000 people are going through these properties. They are unbelievable. One of the properties, 19,000 square feet, 16 bathrooms, a resort-like backyard. It's property 31, if anyone is geeking out on that stuff yet. It's really amazing. There are lots of homes in the 4 millions and 7 millions and 8 millions and things like that. Just incredible properties. Oh, there's another one that is on, it's the first one of its kind. They made their, Peter, you'd love this. This is a lake house, and they built their own lake for surfing. And it's a big, long, yeah, maybe you've heard about it, big, long lake. All the owners have purchased all the lakefront properties, and they've already built their boat garages, and now they can build their houses with that. We went and looked at that was house number 8, I think. And anyway, just incredible. But the reason I bring that up, not only to pitch the St. George Parade of Homes, but the main thing is, so keep the main thing the main thing. Look, we're real estate professionals. Talk about real estate. I know we can sometimes get deviated on our social media stuff and how you connect with people, but keep talking about property. People love it. Even when I start to tell you about the facts of some of these properties, you perk up, right? So everyone does that. They know you as the real estate person in their life. So never, ever minimize that. Keep talking about property. That's what's so fun about what we do. Some of these properties are just incredible. You can talk about specific features that are cool. We started noticing that a lot of the homes down there, the heat is in the floor. So these are slab properties, a lot of them, guys, no basements, right? So concrete goes in first. Well, they put the ducts in the concrete. So that means it's a lot even temperature in the colder months. A little more challenging, admittedly, in the hot months because cold air will sink, right? So you kind of have this concept of that. A lot of heated floors and lots of ceiling to floor windows, which a lot of that we can't really do up north because we'd have a snow problem. But just some phenomenal properties down there, and it gives you a lot of content to talk about. It's not too late. Let the storm pass, get in the car, go down there. It's 70 degrees. It's a completely different world down there right now. My wife, we could probably stop recording.